If you adjust your perception of what is a challenge and what is a superpower, it can change the way that you actually are as well. Like, some kids with ADHD have amazing creativity, amazing hyperfocus, persistence. And so I think one of the most important things we can do as parents of children with ADHD is learn to focus on those positives and reframe ADHD.
Welcome to the Myers Detox Podcast. I'm Dr. Wendy Myers, and this show is all about heavy metal and chemical detoxification, the health issues caused by toxins, and we also discuss anti-aging and bioenergetics and really more advanced topics in health on this show that you'll find on other podcasts. But today we're going to be talking about ADHD and children and how to improve their focus and behavior naturally. And there are so many kids affected by this. There's 6 million children in the US alone that have ADHD. And so this affects a lot of people, a lot of families. And I wanted to touch on this. I have friends that also deal with this. And, 75% of these kids receive medication and or behavioral therapy. And so I want to talk about some other options besides just medication because, the medication like the Adderall, the Ritalin, should not really be the first line of treatment, albeit necessary for sure for many kids, but there's a lot of potential side effects and long-term health issues that we're going to talk about today on the show. And also, I wanted to touch on how ADHD can really be a superpower. A lot of these kids, they're neurodivergent. They have a lot of creativity, hyper focus, persistence, and that's why 30% of CEOs have ADHD. And it's not just bad behavior. And the ADHD symptoms often stem from inflammation, addressing diet, gut health, environmental toxins. These can significantly reduce symptoms. And we talk about on the show doing a holistic approach, focusing on nutrition, reducing inflammation, supporting detoxification. And we also talk about fixing the gut and how leaky gut can lead to food sensitivities and increased inflammation that contribute to symptoms, and how the frontal lobe involved in attention, focus, and executive function is closely connected to gut function. And we talk about how you probably need to remove inflammatory foods like gluten and dairy, artificial colors and flavors for sure, and how to reduce environmental toxins and switch to non-toxic cleaning, personal care products, filtering water, and supporting detoxification with like ionic foot baths are great for children. And we also talk about Dana Kaye's book, Thriving with ADHD, to really go into detail about this natural approach. So lots of really, really good morsels in this show today. If you have a kid with ADHD or you suspect it, or you're even an adult, this show will be great for you as well. Our guest, Dana Kaye, she's a leading ADHD expert, board-certified health and nutrition practitioner, two-time international best-selling author and host of the Soaring Child podcast, and the CEO and founder of the ADHD Thrive Institute. As a mother of a child with ADHD, she knows firsthand the struggles that come with parenting a neurodiverse child and the freedom that's possible once parents learn to reduce ADHD symptoms. Dana's been featured in Forbes and on Fox and CBS and various other online media. And she's also been a guest at multiple parenting and ADHD summits and podcasts. She's helped over 1,300 families find freedom from ADHD symptoms so that children with ADHD can thrive at home, at school, and in life. You can learn more about her work, and she even has a parenting group you can join as well at ADHDthriveinstitute.com. Dana, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you give us a little bit about your background and how you got into working with kids and parents mainly whose kids have ADHD.
Yeah, look, believe it or not, actually, I was completely removed from the sort of health and wellness space. I was actually an accountant in a past life. Please do not look at me differently. uh, I had actually planned to be in that field for my whole career. It was all I wanted to be was a businesswoman when I grew up and with a big office, and I had that. But when I had children, things changed, and if my concerns over my son's health hadn't have grown as much as they did, I wouldn't be where I am today. He I always knew that there was something a little bit different about him, when his meltdowns became more dramatic and his energy always seemed so much more higher than any other child his age. My gut really told me that there was something missing. Eventually sort of that caught up to school and his tantrums became more severe and his teachers started noticing the differences, and at the age of 4, almost 5, he was diagnosed with ADHD and immediately put on medication. If I'm being completely honest, I remember feeling relieved with that diagnosis. Uh, it wasn't that I was a bad mum, it wasn't my fault, and that medication that the doctor had prescribed, I was thinking to myself, "Wow, this is gonna be the pill that's gonna fix our family." But things were great at first, but then his dosage increased, the side effects started to come out, and they became worse and worse. His doctor prescribed another medication to counteract the side effects of the first. And this sort of continued until my son, who is now 5, was on 3 very strong
Mm,
medications all at once.
wow.
And when the doctor suggested a fourth medication to counteract some new side effects that popped up, I just couldn't do it anymore. And that's really when my career path changed. I went back to school. I did my holistic health science degree, multiple specific certifications in this particular area, and really learnt how natural strategies can be just as effective for ADHD as well as medication, against medication. I learned how food can affect so many aspects of our lives. Today, my son, he is 15. He is thriving. He hasn't been on meds for years. He's doing amazing in high school. Straight A student. I mean, for me, that's not an issue at all. Like, that's not what I worry about. But the most important thing for me is he's happy.
Yeah.
We now have sort of this peace and calm in our house, as much as you can have peace and calm with 2 boys. But look, once I learn about the importance of food, and these natural approaches on behavior and focus, and once I saw these changes in my own family, I really couldn't keep this information to myself. I really didn't want any other family to have to go through the struggles that my family went through over the years. And so I've now worked with over 1,300 families, really to help them get to the same place as me, but just so much quicker and without as much stress.
Yes, yeah, and I wanted to talk about this because I know I have several friends that have ADHD, and back in the day, they were not diagnosed in any way, shape,
Mhm.
or form. They were just problem children, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of adults today, they self-medicate. They take stimulants and do those things to turn on their prefrontal cortex. Maybe isn't working so
Yes.
great, so they can focus. And I think a lot more people have ADHD than they realize. So
Mhm.
let's talk about what ADHD and ADD is exactly. And now they're
Yeah.
calling it neurodivergent. So what is
Yes.
that all about?
Yeah, look, it is a spectrum, and I like that. When you say neurodivergent, it shows that it's not just one thing. There is this range of symptoms, and it's actually one of the most common mental disorders affecting children, in particular in the USA. I think there's 6 million children that have been diagnosed. 3/4 of them are either receiving treatment of strong medication and/or behavioral therapy, and symptoms of ADHD can range so much. When my son's ADHD symptoms were at his worst, he would struggle to sit still. There was a lot of emotional dysregulation. This like we were walking on eggshells all the time, just waiting for that next meltdown to occur. Now, the standard ADHD symptoms fall into sort of 2 main categories. We've got hyperactive and impulsive, and then we've got inattention, which is basically the inability to focus. Or you can have a combination of both of those. So, like being unable to sit still, or that hyperactivity, impulsivity, fidgeting, unable to focus or pay attention. We've got excessive physical movement and talking, aggression, and then that emotional dysregulation.
Yeah, and there's also I saw some reel on this the other day that people can have like oppositional defiant disorder, that can be kind of
Yeah,
part of it where they're just resisting authority, just for the
yeah,
sake
that's
of
a
it.
a Definitely. Well, it's a comorbidity that can be diagnosed alongside of ADHD. I think that they sort of estimate maybe about 40% of kids that have ADHD will also have ODD. But what I've learned over the years, a lot of that ODD and a lot of that emotional dysregulation actually comes to the state that the body's in. Is it in a state of inflammation? And we'll probably dive into this a little bit more. I actually find one of the first things that improves when you actually start reducing inflammation in the body is that emotional dysregulation, which is usually the hardest thing to handle as a parent. And so it's usually the first thing that improves, which is kind of makes you feel a little bit better about going down this path.
Yes, and so let's talk about that first thing that happens when your child is diagnosed with ADHD. You're immediately prescribed medication. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just go to the doctor. That's the first thing that's given. And so why is that medication prescribed, and why should that not be the first line of treatment?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you're so right. When a child is diagnosed with ADHD, usually the first course of treatment that most doctors suggest is medication. Many of them don't even tell you or tell the parents that making some other changes, like diet, like natural strategies, like reducing toxin exposure, all of those things that you probably talk about a lot on this podcast, they can significantly reduce ADHD symptoms. This is what happened with my son. Our doctor didn't mention any other course of treatment. The only one he told us about was medication. And so, that's when I sort of started going and down and doing this research. And look, it's like any sort of traditional medicine path. Doctors are looking to diagnose with a diagnostic code and then provide a prescription that is going to treat the symptoms of that diagnostic
And
code.
and some kids
And
may need that. I mean, they may need
Hun
medication.
yeah, 100%. I am not against medication at all. There is definitely a time and place for it, and I say that a lot, but it should not be the first port of call, especially when you've got a 4 or a 5-year-old, when sometimes these natural strategies can be just as effective, if not more effective. And, because, these amphetamine medications, the long-term damage that it can do to the body, to the growth, where you think about kids are growing so much from the age of, when they're born to the age of 18. With adults, it's slightly different. They're done growing. But a lot of these medications, they can stunt growth. They can change brain chemistry. They can, suppress your appetite. You have an inability to sleep. And so for kids, all of those aspects are so crucial to their long-term growth and development. And so let's try things that don't necessarily have those side effects. I mean, who doesn't feel better when they eat better? And that's definitely one of the things that I sort of preach is food should be first. It's what makes us thrive. And I can assure that most parents and people out there that know that when they eat bad food, they feel bad. And it's the same with our children. And so let's try these things first. And if they don't, and then a kid, gets into middle school or high school and they're still struggling, then you can try medication. And so I think that it's not about this is the only way, this is my way or the highway. It is really like we need to sort of take this food first approach, meaning that rather than trying to find a magical pill that's going to fix our child, we clean up their body instead. We clean up their diet instead. And in doing this, we're reducing inflammation, and then the symptoms start to reduce because we're actually getting to the bottom of what's causing those symptoms in the first place. I often think of it like this. When you're building a house, a solid foundation is an optional. It's a necessity, isn't it? If you don't have a solid foundation, that house isn't gonna be very strong, and it is exactly the same way with us. Diet is our foundation, and if our diet is poor, we can never function at our best. It's true for us as adults, but so true for our children as well, who are going through so much growth and development.
If you're taking protein powder, you need to stop and listen to this. So, the Clean Label Project recently tested 160 of the top selling protein powders in the US. So, they tested 83% of the market, which is 70 different brands, and 40% of the products tested exceeded Prop 65 safety thresholds for lead. 21% had more than 2 times the Prop 65 safety thresholds for other heavy metals and toxins. 65% of chocolate protein powders tested over the Prop 65 safety thresholds, and 77% of plant-based protein powders tested above these thresholds as well. That's definitely not what you want from products that are supposed to support your health, particularly it's something that you're consuming daily. What this study found was that Puree's PW1 protein powder was awarded the number one cleanest protein powder out of 130 different brands. So the choice is clear. That's why I love Puree's PW1 whey protein powder. Every batch is third-party tested against 200 plus contaminants. They don't sell any product unless it passes these tests, and they make all of their third-party tests available via a QR code. So you can scan this QR code and you can see exactly what is in this product and what this batch tested for. No other brand is doing that because they won't pass the test. Each serving gives you 21 grams of minimally processed, clean, high-quality whey protein powder from pasture-raised cow's milk. So no hormones, no GMOs, no pesticides, nothing to worry about. And I personally love the bourbon vanilla flavor. You get real vanilla seeds from bourbon vanilla from Madagascar, which is known as the best vanilla in the world. It's high quality. It tastes amazing. Even my daughter loves it. Even my daughter mentioned how she loves the vanilla flavor in it. And I work with Puree on an amazing deal for you. You can get 20% off, or if you choose the already discounted subscription, you get almost a third off the price. But you're only going to get this deal if you visit my exclusive link at puree.com/Wendy and use coupon code Wendy. So that's PUORI.com/Wendy, WENDY, and just use my code Wendy to get 20% off this amazing deal of the highest quality whey protein powder that's been tested for 200 plus contaminants. So you can't beat this for quality. This is my number one recommendation for protein powder because the results are in. Puree is the number one cleanest testing protein powder on the market. Yeah, and I wanted to touch on the medication just a little bit more because I think parents don't realize what they're giving their children when they give them
Mm,
this medication because Adderall is exactly the same chemical formula as crystal methamphetamine. It's like a
yep.
synthetic form of it, which is really, really scary. And
Yeah.
when you take that, and I've tried Adderall before.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had a business partner that had ADHD, and I was really tired one day. I'm like, let me try that. So, and
Mhm.
I felt amazing.
Yeah.
But who wouldn't when taking stimulants like that? But I did not sleep that night,
Mhm.
and in that long term, my concern is that kids are not going to get restorative, regenerative sleep. It's going to burn out their cortisol receptors, maybe
Yes.
even set up the doorway to addictions to stimulants or things like that. But I
Mhm.
get that need to turn on that prefrontal cortex that is
Yeah.
basically just not functioning, or maybe it's smaller than the next person, or whatever that deficit is there.
Mhm.
Like I get it, but I think people don't understand what exactly they're giving their kids, the Ritalin or Adderall, and the long-term consequences of that really frighten me. I've definitely had a couple friends that have ADHD, and as adults, that they've been on Adderall for like 20 years, and they're a
Mhm.
mess. I mean,
Yeah.
they're a mess after
Yep.
being on that medication, and they can't function unless they take it. Like they just
Yeah, I
go
look
into a deep, deep depression.
yeah, I think that you're exactly right. I mean, and I think that it's a really important topic to talk about because, as parents, we're just desperate to bring a bit of balance and peace back to our house. Like for us, it was this emotional roller coaster. I would go to bed every single night feeling guilty about the way that I treat my son. I would wake up every morning dreading the day ahead because I was worried about what he was gonna do or how what was gonna happen today. But, the medications don't fix symptoms. They're a band-aid, but they chemically override how the brain functions. Sometimes, with serious long-term effects, as you said, and doctors rarely tell you what they are. And what you said with Ritalin, Adderall, Vyvanse is another one. They work by increasing dopamine and norepinephrine levels in the brain, and these are the neurotransmitters that are responsible for that motivation, that focus, and that impulse control. And so, yes, they may be out of focus better, but it also forces the brain into this hyperfocus state. And as you said, it can deplete cortisol. And this hyperfocus state, it's not always natural or balanced. It artificially boosts that dopamine, and ADHD brains often have lower dopamine levels, which makes it harder to regulate and focus. But stimulants push those dopamine levels up, but this can lead to that dependency over time. They suppress the appetite. Many kids lose weight and have poor growth because of these meds because they reduce the hunger signals, and that's what happened with my son. When lost so much weight, it affects sleep and mood. It increases alertness, but they disrupt sleep, increase anxiety, even cause these mood swings. Some kids, experience this emotional blunting where they seem less joyful and engaged. That was my son. He was like a shadow of himself. It caused this sort of zombie like sort of behavior in him. And that can definitely happen if you've got a dose that's too high as well. But what happened with us, they wear off abruptly. They've got this rebound effect. So many kids will experience focus at school, but then they'll experience crashes as the medication leaves their symptoms, and that leads to so much more worse outbursts, irritability, and worse behavior than even before taking the pill. But I think it's important to understand that this matters for long-term brain development because they don't fix the brain, they just chemically override the symptoms. The brain then adapts over time, meaning that higher doses are needed. The body becomes more dependent on the medication for that dopamine regulation. And medications, they don't address the root cause like gut health, inflammation, nutrient deficiency. They actually create even more nutrient deficiencies because the kids aren't hungry, or this nervous system dysregulation, which are all huge factors with when it's coming to the growth of our children.
Yeah, I think it's also important to not necessarily look at your child with ADHD or ADD as it's not necessarily like a problem. It's
No.
just their brains work differently. Like 30% of CEOs have ADHD. They're people
Yes.
that are doers. They might not be as good as, sitting at a desk and being still and focusing on a textbook, but they have that energy to get up and go and get stuff done. And it can be it's not necessarily like a problem. It's just a difference in how these kids function and learn. And it seems like their school environment, they need to be in a school environment that maybe fosters that versus
Yeah.
forcing them to sit still in a chair, which it seems
Yeah.
very unnatural, especially for boys that have a lot of testosterone and energy,
100%.
plus
Yeah.
ADD, ADHD. It's just seems like a recipe for disaster.
I love that you raised that because, I do definitely look at it as a superpower. There may be these challenges, but, if you adjust your perception of what is a challenge and what is a superpower, it can change the way that you actually are as well. Like some kids with ADHD have amazing creativity, amazing hyperfocus, persistence, and so I think one of the most important things we can do as parents of children with ADHD is learn to focus on those positives and reframe ADHD. What I do in the work that I do is let's help our children with ADHD thrive in life, and that comes with a couple of different areas, and one of those is, looking at reframing it. Kids with ADHD hear negative comments all day long. I think that there was a study that showed that they hear 20,000 more negative comments by the time they're 12 years old compared to their neurotypical peers. So we just want to reframe it, and we want to fill up with positive affirmations. And I love that you raised that.
Yeah, and also what seems just very obvious, if a kid can't sit still in their chair, which I'm sure drives teachers nuts, and they just want to get
Mhm.
medicated and shut up and sit down.
Mhm.
But what makes sense to me is, I had my daughter, we interviewed at this one private school, and they started the day with exercise and very specific exercises that calm down the nervous system so that the brain could then focus the rest of the day. And I thought, God, what a concept, to,
What a concept. I
and
know.
what, I mean, just for even with for a child that it's not neurodivergent or doesn't have ADHD, they still would need that, but especially
Mhm.
more so for a child that does have ADHD.
Look, I think that, unfortunately, our school system is stuck in the ice ages, and it hasn't adapted. You know, our lives have adapted so much. You think about now how much technology we've got, how, much more, where, parents are, like, on our kids so much that more. There's more sports, there's more pressure on them, and so they do need this outlet. It's different than I used to go and play in the street for hours on end when I was young. Now my kids, they get home at 6 o'clock because they've been at sports all afternoon. They come home, they have to do their homework. They just want to chill out and do a little bit of, computer games. They're not out there playing. They're not out exploring their creativity. They're not out there regulating their nervous system. They're not connecting to nature. And so our lives have changed, but the schooling system hasn't. It's still back in the days where technology wasn't around. It's still back in the days where there wasn't this pressure on our children to perform as greatly as they have to now.
Yeah, I wonder if, so this is such a ADHD is so prevalent, if there's certain like special schools or school programs that cater to kids with ADHD.
Look, there are, they're few and far between, but unfortunately, what tends to happen is the kids that suffer the most, they do go to those schools and when you have everyone that's dealing with those issues, it can create a different sort of level of environment. So it's better not to just segregate it because again, I think that's creating this stigma that ADHD is a bad thing when it's not a bad thing. It is a superpower. You just need to know how to, you know, boost that dopamine naturally. You just need to know how to help that body thrive as much as it can possibly and you need to learn how to manage it in a different way. And if you can do that, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And I think that, you know, uh, that's unfortunately, with medication, it is blunting them. It is blunting their, these superpowers because that's what's actually going to help them thrive. And we really want to focus on that. We want to focus on, optimizing the body to be able to thrive in what it needs and give the body what it needs.
Are you taking collagen supplements? Well, check this out. So, our friends at Organifi have sourced the best collagen on the planet, and you can get it with 20% off savings today, too. So, what is collagen? So, it's the most abundant protein in our body. It's everywhere. It's in your muscles, your joints, your hair, your skin, your fingernails, everywhere. And it's one of the fundamental building blocks of life. And your body uses collagen constantly to keep itself refreshed and repaired. But as you get older, especially as women that are going into menopause, you can lose 30% of your collagen within the first 5 years of menopause. And that starts in perimenopause as well. So your body just stops making as much of it and you start losing it, especially as your estrogen levels come down. And so that's why consuming collagen is such a great idea every single day. So it gives your body a fresh supply to keep working at its best. And it's not only good for your hair, skin, and nails, it helps to support your gut and metabolic health, your immune system, your cardiovascular strength, and all of your muscles and moving parts too. And collagen's nothing new. It's one of the oldest supplements out there. And collagen supplements have been around for quite a while now. But what makes Organifi so special is it's all about the quality. So the non-organic collagens scare me. They're really, really problematic because they can be full of glyphosate and pesticides and other chemicals that you do not want to be taking on a daily basis because not all collagens are the same. So it can come from many different sources. and the source can drastically impact its potency and effectiveness as well. And some manufacturers just go with the cheapest stuff that they can find and then add fillers and artificial flavors, and they still charge you a lot of money for that. So Organifi always goes the extra mile to ensure their quality is the best. So they blend 5 collagen types from 4 different sources, and they taste and test until it's perfect. And then they go even further to test for things like glyphosate residue and other sneaky toxins that can get into the mix. And after passing through all of these goalposts, it finally gets the Organifi seal of approval. So you can rest assured it's the highest quality and non-toxic. And I love that this company is a company that I can trust, that their products will be safe and effective exactly as they say they will be. And in the supplement world these days, that kind of honesty and transparency is getting harder to come by. So if you've never tried collagen, now is a great time to start. And if you're already taking it, now is a great time to switch to a better brand, upgrade what you're doing right now. So you and your entire body are going to love Organifi. Collagen is something that I take on a daily basis. It's been a part of my supplement routine for the past 5 years since I went into menopause. And so I can't recommend it highly enough. And so now let's talk about saving you some cash as well. Here's what you do. Go to Organifi.com/Myers Detox and put in coupon code Myers Detox to get 20% off. So go to Organifi, ORGANIFI.com/MYERSDETOX. And don't forget the Myers Detox coupon code as well. You'll save an extra 20% off by putting in my special coupon code Myers Detox. So like I said, collagen is one of those things that I take every single day. It's one of the most important parts of my anti-aging protocol, the things I'm doing to fight off the clock. So for me, taking clean collagen is really important. It's hard to find. So I highly, highly recommend Organifi collagen. Yes, and so let's talk about diet. And
Yep.
so obviously in the United States and other westernized countries, the kids' diet is just horrifying. With
Mm,
all of the fast food and the industrial
yeah.
seed oils and the food colorings and all this stuff. And I'm just so thankful that today Robert F. Kennedy Jr. got
Yes.
confirmed to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So hopefully we're going to start seeing an improvement in the next
Mhm.
coming years in our food, in more regulation of these big food companies that are essentially profiting from harming our health. So can you talk about that? Like, what are the foods in the diet that kids with ADHD need to avoid like the plague?
Look, I mean, I like to, think about ADHD, the number one thing that's driving ADHD symptoms. I just wanna take a step back before I sort of go into what those dietary changes are, but, and I think that this can be the driver of most disease and disorders out there, but one of the biggest stresses and that's contributing to exacerbating the not so good ADHD symptoms is inflammation. And it's important to start by reducing this inflammation from the start. Chronic inflammation has become just so prevalent over the years, and it's just linked to so many diseases and disorders. And, inflammation is essential in our body for like wound healing and chronic, but chronic infection itself can wreak havoc on the whole body, on all the healthy tissues. And so I really like to focus on how can we reduce that chronic inflammation by making lifestyle changes, And one of those is diet. It's not the only one. And so where can we reduce inflammation as much as possible? So look, I think with food, I always sort of say there are a couple of, like, foods that are really not so good, for inflammation. I will say the way that p wheat is processed in the US is highly inflammatory, unfortunately, and so gluten is one of those top foods that is contributing to that inflammation. It's driving that inflammation in the body. We've got dairy. Conventional dairy, unfortunately, is also driving inflammation in the body. There's some studies that show that kids that are sensitive to gluten, about 50% of them are also sensitive to dairy. And so if you're just looking at a whole category, I'd say gluten and dairy, and then we've got these things like artificial flavors and colors, which Again, love RFK Jr. I love the fact that, uh, red dye number 3 has already been banned, which is amazing. It's got to go further, though. There are so many artificials and flavors and preservatives that are in our packaged foods these days. I know that there's probably parents out there listening going, oh my gosh, how am I going to take those foods out of my child's diet? And like, stressful, stressful. All I say to the families is Rome wasn't built in a day. You do not need to take everything out at once. I did back in the day when my son was 5 years old. I took out gluten, dairy, soy, artificial flavors and colors, 40 food sensitivities that I'd seen on a lab test. Let's just say I ended up with multiple panic attacks on the floor in my bedroom, and that is definitely not what I teach to the families that I work with. And so, really, like that, it's adjusting our lifestyle, and then when we can adjust our lifestyle slowly, it just becomes your normal. It becomes like it's not stressful anymore, and so I really take that small slow step. But let's focus on what we should be eating rather than what we're taking out. It's not just about what foods to take out, it's what we put into our body. And so, best tip is to really focus on those whole nutritious fresh fruits and veggies, grass-fed animal protein like meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, that balanced diet. You want to get plenty of healthy fats like avocado, coconut, olive oils, and then drinking plenty of spring water. So you're sort of avoiding some harmful chemicals in some of the waters, but also water helps us detox and remove some of the toxins that are already there. And so if we can really focus on what to feed and then slowly reduce the things that are creating that inflammation, it is, phenomenal to look at the changes that can happen in our children. I'll tell you, when I removed out gluten from my son's diet, literally within 2 weeks, he was a different kid.
My daughter too has a pretty severe gluten sensitivity, and her whole personality changes within
Mhm.
30 minutes of eating gluten. It's like
Interesting.
it just does something to her brain where she's
Yeah.
just super hyperactive. She doesn't have ADHD, but she gets really hyperactive and laughing
Mhm.
constantly, and like she gets a lot of brain inflammation and high almost from it.
Well, I mean, it's so and there's probably a reason for that. So I do one of the tests that I do inside the business is something called a wheat zoomer, Zoomer. I have to spell it because of my accent, but what this does, it actually looks at the different antibodies that your body has developed against gluten and wheat, and there's two antibodies in gluten. One is called glutamorphin, one is called protonorphin, and in dairy there is one called casomorphin, and these actually act and bind to opioid receptors in the brain. And so if your body has developed antibodies against that, when you eat gluten, it actually triggers that response in the brain. And that's why you see these neuropsychological symptoms that are coming out when you eat gluten. But also these kids that have developed antibodies to gluten in this way, they actually are more prone to going through a gluten withdrawal process. And so their symptoms can actually get worse before they get better. And so you just got to stick through that gluten withdrawal because, I love when I see those antibodies on a lab test. I know that's a little bit funny to say, but I know that those are the kids that are going to have the best results when they take out gluten.
So this episode is brought to you by Chef's Foundry. They've got a fantastic line of cookware called P600. It's totally non-toxic. I think people don't realize that when they're cooking, most people's cookware is adding toxins to their healthy food, that people spend so much money on healthy organic food and then cook it in toxic cookware. And so that includes cast iron, which I do not recommend. It adds way too much iron in a form that we can't absorb. People use aluminum cookware, which is very inexpensive, but it's used at most restaurants, giving us tons of aluminum. People are also using ceramic cookware, which can leach toxins into your food. And not to mention the nonstick cookware. It just has so many PFAS or PFAS that is so toxic. It's one of the forever chemicals. So you really have to pay attention to what you're cooking in. So that's why I recommend the P600 line by Chef's Foundry, so that you can have peace of mind when you're cooking and you're not getting any nasty chemicals like lead or cadmium or nickel or PFAS in your healthy food. You can get a special discount for my listeners by going to bit.ly/Myers Detox. So that's bit.ly/Myers Detox, MYERS DETOX, to get an exclusive discount just for my listeners. I want you to be thinking about what you're cooking your food in, and I highly recommend the P600 line by Chef's Foundry. Yes, yeah, and some kids, that's all they're eating. Like every
Mhm.
meal, they're eating
Every meal.
pizza and their
Yep.
hamburgers and whatnot. So it's just it can be challenging. But I think it's also important, if you have a young child diagnosed with ADHD, is just, raising a child who doesn't like unhealthy foods because you don't feed
Mhm.
them to them. I know a lot of kids, a lot of parents have been, giving their kids junk food, and everyone at school is eating the Doritos and things like that. But it can be really helpful starting at a very young age. Like I just didn't give
Yes.
my daughter sugar.
Mhm.
We never, gave her any kind of sodas or anything like that. So starting early, it develops their tastes. So my daughter's a teen. She doesn't like soda. She's never had it. So I
Mhm.
think those are really important. But I know a lot of parents are, we're too far gone, and there's, there's a lot of corrections to be made. Can you talk more about food sensitivities testing? Because there's, a lot of different foods that kids can be sensitive to, and how important is that if your child has ADHD?
Yeah, look, I think that you want to, I like to take this sort of a little bit of a blanket approach. The goal to helping a child with ADHD thrive is reducing inflammation in their body. And so we want to try and determine what is causing that inflammation in the body. Okay. And so we want to look at a few different things. And I'll go down a little bit of a path, but I'll address what you said with food sensitivities. Food sensitivities are currently the foods that are exacerbating inflammation. They're not necessarily like allergies. You can heal from them. Once you can heal the gut and close the holes in the lining of the gut, then you won't be sensitive to those foods anymore. But I like to sort of take this global approach for the period of healing of like, let's do whatever we can to reduce the inflammation so we can allow the healing to occur. And that's where food sensitivity testing comes through. If you were just to do a food sensitivity on its own, that is not the right approach because you actually need to look at why were those food sensitivities there in the first place. And that usually comes because of something called leaky gut or intestinal permeability. Now, the gut brain connection is super important when it comes to ADHD. Now, that's because, okay, firstly, it's important to anything because 80% of the body's entire immune system is within the gut wall, along with, billions of nerve cells and an extensive amount of gut bacteria. So all of our children's health is quite literally connected to everything that occurs in the gut. But also, the gut brain connection, what it means is the gut is deeply connected to our brain. And if our guts aren't functioning well, our brain won't be able to function well either. 95% of the body's serotonin, about 50% of the body's dopamine, plus some other neurotransmitters are produced in the gut. And these are the neurotransmitters or the hormones that help us manage our emotions. They balance our mood. They help our cognitive function. Now, as I mentioned earlier, emotional dysregulation, it's a common symptom of ADHD, but many parents don't realize that a lot of this emotional dysregulation actually starts in the gut, where that serotonin, the dopamine, the GABA, all of that sort of stuff is made or bacteria produces those. Now, the problem is not the emotions themselves, but the fact that the correct amount of these vital neurotransmitters are not being made as well. So we can work to improve gut health, and we find that that emotional dysregulation symptoms solve themselves. But the thing that I like to talk about the most, the brain has many areas involved in gut function. The main area is the frontal lobe. Okay. For those just listening, I'm pointing to the middle of my forehead. For those watching, you would have seen me point to the middle of my forehead, but it's the area of the brain that talks to the gut via two-way chemical messengers. And the frontal lobe is involved in things like attention and focus, and executive function, and planning, and organizing, and problem solving. Do any of those areas sound like ones that are affected by ADHD? And, if you are familiar with ADHD, you're probably nodding your head because they are areas that most kids and adults struggle with. Because the frontal lobe is in the brain, many people are under the impression it's the brain that needs care, when in reality, it's also the gut that's causing the problem. Now, I know that that's not directly answering your food sensitivity panel question, but I just want to go back to explain that. And just, I'll give a quick analogy quickly, but have you ever sort of felt butterflies in your stomach because you were nervous about something? Maybe it was a conflict or a test or whatever. That's a perfect example of the gut brain connection, and our bodies perceive whatever we're nervous about as a stressful situation, and then our brains trigger those raw emotions in the gut that result in that nausea or those butterflies. But the reverse is also true. So our guts are talking to our brain, and so when we've got a breakdown of the gut, when we've got a higher level of bad bacteria, that's called gut dysbiosis, and that gut dysbiosis creates inflammation, and that inflammation travels through the vagus nerve into the brain, and so that's how that connection works. Now, what can happen is when we're eating poor foods like the ones we talked about, when we're taking antibiotics, which happens so frequently. I think my son was on, I actually haven't counted, but probably more than 8 rounds of antibiotics before he was the age of 4. And unfortunately, with antibiotics, they're great for getting the virus or the infection that's going on in the body, but they can't distinguish between what's good and what's bad. And so they actually break down or kill off the good bacteria, and many people suffer lasting changes. But they also break the lining of the gut. Same with ADHD meds. They break the lining of the gut and they're constantly there. And what happens is you end up with these holes or a breakdown in the lining of the gut. And when you eat food, even the healthiest food, it can actually go through the holes in the lining of the gut into our bloodstream, and our body sees it as a foreign invader and it turns on this inflammatory response. And so, even if you've got a healthy food and it goes through that hole, you've started turning on this inflammatory response and it further breaks down the lining of the gut. So, we want to see what's causing that inflammatory response. And that's where a food sensitivity panel comes in, to look at what's causing that inflammatory response so we can temporarily remove those foods and then heal the gut. But what people do is they do just one food sensitivity panel. We want to know what caused that leaky gut in the first place. Was it bad bacteria? Was it a parasite? Is there mold exposure? So many different things. So we do want to do some other testing along with that food sensitivity panel so we can heal and reduce that inflammation from other areas while we heal the lining of the gut, and then we can add back those foods successfully. I know that that was very long-winded. I
No, that
hopefully
was
that answers
great.
your question.
No, that was a great explanation because that applies to everybody. I mean, I'm always
Yeah.
thinking, what can I do for my gut bacteria? And so, what are some things that parents can do? Because I think a lot of people fall into this category where they need to eat some healing foods and, consistently repopulate the gut with, good bacteria. So, what are your suggestions there?
Yeah, look, we will obviously want to find what's causing the inflammation in the first place. So that's where the role of functional lab testing come in, and so working with a practitioner to do that lab testing to determine. But if you can't afford it, and this is a topic that really gets me every time. I just wish these were covered by insurance because there would be so many more families that could be helped, if a lot of these tests were covered by insurance. But if you don't have the budget for it, really focus on the things that you control, and that's what you put in your mouth. That's the foods that's actually going to break down the lining of the gut, and just start eating a variety of foods that are high in fiber and nutrients are really good. There are some supplements that are really good, not only for leaky gut, but also good for kids with ADHD. One of those is a good quality fish oil, for omega-3 fatty acids, because with all these packaged foods, unfortunately, what happens is we get an overload of omega-6 fatty acids, and omega-3 and omega-6 are meant to be in this 1-to-1 ratio. But now the bodies are so high in omega-6 that we need to boost up the omega-3s. There's a lot of studies out there that support that fish oil can support memory, hyperactivity, clear thinking, behavioral disorders, organizational skills in kids age 8 to 12, but it also reduces inflammation in the body. So that's what we want to do, is we want to reduce that inflammation. then we want to bring in a good quality probiotic. Okay. Research suggests that taking probiotics that contain either certain types of bacteria or even spore forming probiotics, which reseed the gut rather than, just certain bacteria that actually doesn't survive digestion. This can help support detoxification. It can help with anxiety, boosting up that serotonin that I was talking about, help with mood. It can also support the body against the damaging and mental effects of stress. Okay. Now, those are probably two really key supplements that kids with ADHD, I can go on and on and on supplements, but control where you can. And that is like, let's reduce the things in our lives that are contributing to the breakdown in the lining of the gut. That's food. You probably talk a lot about detox and toxins here, and so reduce those toxins and let's support the gut with those nutrient dense foods, fiber rich foods, and some base supplements.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next, question for you is environmental toxins and their
Mm,
contribution to
yeah.
ADHD. Because certainly, a lot of these different, toxins in our food, like food coloring is shown to
Mhm.
increase hyperactivity. I forget
Hyperactivity,
which, I think
yeah.
yellow and blue are
Yep,
one of the
and
big
red.
ones, and, certainly there's many, many toxins that are gonna interfere in the gut functioning and the brain
Yeah,
function. If you have leaky brain, may have leaky
keep
if you have
gut.
leaky gut, you may have leaky brain also,
Yes.
and, glyphosate, that's in all the non-organic food shown to have a negative effect on the gut bacteria, and so why don't you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, look, I think that that's a really, really good point. It is not just about food. We want to take this blanket approach and control where we can control. But again, Rome wasn't built in a day. You don't need to do everything in day one. I still have some things in my house that could be better for me, but I'm not going to throw every single thing out in day one because I don't think I'd be able to afford to replace anything. So, I actually like to sort of use this trash can analogy. I use a few analogies. I'm sorry that I I tend to like to sort of break it down a little bit to make it a bit more understandable, but we're all sort of born with this metaphorical trash can in our body and I think our key through life is to keep that trash can as empty as possible. That's we want to keep the toxic load on our body low. And so what happens is that trash can fills up over time, and it can for all of us. So those inflammatory substances like toxins that are coming from our cleaning products or our personal care products, coming from those food dyes or those preservatives. We've then got pesticides like what you mentioned, glyphosate. We've got meds that contribute. They all contribute to that trash can. Now, our body is a wonderful thing. It is designed to work to keep emptying the trash can, just like we do in our house. We've got our trash can. On Mondays, we take it out to the sidewalk. The garbage truck comes along and it empties the trash can. But just think about it. If that trash can wasn't taken to the sidewalk or the garbage truck didn't come, what would happen in our house? That trash can would get so full. It would, like, spill out all in our house. Think about how disgusting our house would be. That's the same thing that can happen in our body. So we're not all created equal. We're not all born with the same genetics. And some of us, we can easily empty our trash cans. Meaning when they get too full, we can take them to the side of the road. But others with certain genetics, they mean that their detoxification pathways are not working as properly as possible. And so they're not able to empty as easily as some others. So they can't empty their trash can because their detoxification pathways are not working properly just like my son's. That's exactly what happened with us. And so when that gets too full of all of these inflammatory substances and we can't detox properly, the trash can overflows in our body, allows that inflammation to spread. So that's why we like to take that global approach. Food, toxins like the glyphosate, like what you mentioned, because when you've got an overflowing trash can, it's overflowing, it's stressing the body, it's causing these various behavioral, emotional, physical symptoms. And so we've got, you're probably wondering, well, how do I know if my trash can's overflowing? Sleep disturbances, chronic fatigue, emotional dysregulation, skin problems. A lot of kids are suffering with eczema, rashes, frequent infections like reoccurring colds or infections, sensory sensitivities. Like, you wouldn't connect sensory overload with an overfilling trash can, would you? but it is so true. Behavioral symptoms, inability to focus. And so there are many things that we can do to reduce that load on the trash can. And one of those is those environmental toxins, maybe switching to non-toxic cleaning products, like use natural alternatives. We can put a filter on our tap water, natural care products, choosing organic foods. I mean, I think that people are going to need to pause this podcast and probably get a piece of paper and write down all of these things. But I know, Wendy, you are all over this stuff. And so I'm sure that you've talked about it over and over again. You're the queen of detox.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I could see where, an ionic foot bath would be super helpful for
yes.
kids because, a lot of them, they may be too young to do infrared saunas, but ionic
Mm,
foot baths, any
yep.
kid can put their feet in there. They're going to pull out a ton of toxins. You
Yes.
can add a binder on there like my CitraCleanse, or I love my Vital C, which is
Yep.
like a kind of a C60 type binder. I
Yep.
think those would be like so helpful for a kid with ADHD to just, or any kid to really effectively and easily detox their body.
Yeah, you're 100% correct there. That's definitely some of the suggestions that I make. Even just a simple detox bars, getting magnesium flakes, getting your kid to soak in the bath, which they're probably doing anyway. Magnesium flakes, 20 minutes, a few times a week. That's going to help reduce the exposure and bring in some binders, like you mentioned. And it's amazing what can start to happen. And that can help that kid to thrive. They can start to feel less foggy in their brain. And so I love this conversation so much.
So, for anyone listening that really wants to detox their body, go to heavymetalsquiz.com. I created a quiz for you. It only takes a couple of seconds. Based on some lifestyle questions, you can get your toxicity score and get a free video series that answers all of your frequently asked questions about how to detox your body. Check it out, heavymetalsquiz.com. Yeah, tell us about your book. So you have a book about this to help guide
Yes.
parents. So why don't
Yes.
you tell us about that?
Yeah, no, look, the book is like a labor of love for me. When it's called the Thriving with ADHD, it's a guide to naturally reducing ADHD symptoms in your child. Years ago, like I wanted a book on ADHD that sort of clearly spelt out exactly what I needed to do to support my son with ADHD naturally, but I could never find it. I was just Googling for something, for anything, that might actually help us get some relief from his challenging symptoms. But I struck out again and again. And so that's why I wrote that book. It is that labor of love. It was my first book. It became an international best-selling book in child's health, which for me is probably like the biggest thing. I still can't believe it. It's my life's work, and it's the guide that I really needed. When I started this journey with my son, but I couldn't find it. I feel that it's a bit different than other books out there because I'm not only a practitioner, but I'm also a mum who totally gets exactly what the families are going through. And that's available on Amazon, or you can buy it much cheaper on my website. It's like $5 on my website, or it's like 20 something on Amazon. So that's Thriving with ADHD, a guide to naturally reducing ADHD symptoms in your child.
Yeah, and what is your website?
My website is adhdthriveinstitute.com.
Okay, fantastic. And you also work with parents you have a program where you can
Yes.
also help coach them as well, correct?
Yes, yes, it's called ADHD Thrive Method for Kids, and it takes this blanket approach of trying to reduce inflammation in their body so we can help those kids thrive. And it doesn't just focus on diet, it doesn't just focus on toxins. We do functional lab testing, we help that gut brain connection, we help that detox that we've been talking about today, but we also focus on things inside the family. We have a parent and child therapist that works alongside us, so we really focus on parenting specifically for ADHD as well, which is different than parenting a child that's neurotypical. So we really take that holistic approach to help that child and to help that family thrive.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's like such important tips. And, I hope that this podcast really helps to open some parents' eyes and guide them that there's other alternatives, or these are things that need to be done in addition to just, not just medicating your child. You have a whole range of things that you need to do, which would benefit your whole family, the health of your entire family and yourself as well by
Hands down.
adopting a lot of these things that we're talking about. So thank you so much, Dana, for coming on the show. And everyone, I'm Dr. Wendy Myers. And again, thanks so much for tuning in every week to the Myers Detox podcast. I love all these interviews that I do every week. I learn so much, but it's really more to help you make those distinctions that you need to make so that you can live the life that you deserve, that long, healthy, disease-free, medication-free life. That's my goal for you, and that's why I'm doing this show. So thanks for tuning in. God bless.
The Myers Detox Podcast is created and hosted by Wendy Myers. This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Wendy Myers and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.